I'm so close to rebuilding the $6 million Bugatti Chiron purse ball. I can't believe that's how it comes off.
A man stood alone next to a $6 million car and felt something break inside his chest, but it was not sadness. It was the strange, heavy feeling that comes when a 2-year fight is finally over and you do not know what to do with your hands anymore. Mat Armstrong had just torqued the last carbon fiber panel into place on a Bugatti Chiron purse sport that the factory had once called unfixable, and for the first time in 730 days, the car was not almost finished. It was finished. No warning lights blinked on the dashboard. No hidden fault code was waiting to ruin the moment. The paint was flawless, the engine idled with a low, patient hum, and the workshop around him smelled like brake cleaner and hot metal and something close to victory. He should have felt proud. Instead, standing there in the Miami heat with sweat drying on the back of his neck, he felt something he had never expected to feel about a car that was never even his. He realized, quietly and all at once, that he could not give it back. What happened in the hours after that thought is now splitting the internet into two loud, angry camps, and almost none of them understand what they are actually watching. This is the real story of the night Matt tried to buy the car he built with his own hands, the night his best friend Alex Gonzalez looked him in the eye and said no, and the reason that single word may end up doing more damage to Bugatti than any lawsuit ever could. Most viewers assume this is a story about money, or friendship, or one man's ego getting in the way of a fair deal. It is none of those things. It is something far more patient and far more dangerous to the people who try to stop this rebuild from ever happening. To understand why a simple offer and a simple refusal have become the most talked about 5 minutes in the entire independent repair community, you have to go back to the phone call that started it. A call so short and so strange that Alex almost did not take it seriously. Matt did not mention champagne. He did not mention a celebration, or a photographer, or a first drive down Ocean Drive with the top down and the world watching. He said only a handful of words, spoken slowly, like a man who had already rehearsed every syllable in his head 100 times before he ever picked up the phone. Alex drove to the workshop that evening expecting the payoff of 2 years of patience, expecting to see his car sitting under clean shop lights, ready to be driven away as his own. What he found instead was Matt sitting quietly on a stool beside the finished Chiron, one hand resting on the rear wing, staring at the car the way a father looks at a child he already knows he is about to lose. There was no music playing. There were no cameras rolling that either of them could see. There was only a workshop, a finished hypercar, and a decision that neither man had ever had to make before, because no one had ever finished a car quite like this one. What Matt said next, and what Alex said back to him, would within hours be picked apart by millions of strangers online who had no idea they were only seeing the surface of something built to look small on purpose. The internet loves a fight, and it was handed one on a silver platter, but the truth sitting underneath that fight is far bigger than a disagreement over a car. It is the final move in a plan that started the day this Chiron first arrived on a trailer, broken, humiliated, and written off by the very company that built it. The offer Matt made that night was not casual, and it was not small. He named a number that sat well above the car's current market value, a number that accounted for every dollar Alex had ever spent since the day the wrecked Chiron first arrived at the shop. Every cost from the disastrous Venom body panel disaster that had nearly ended the entire project, every month of waiting through delays, lawsuits, and public ridicule, and every ounce of stress Alex had absorbed while defending a rebuild that half the internet had turned into a running joke. Matt was not trying to lowball his friend. He was not looking for a discount out of loyalty or friendship. He wanted to pay full, fair, honest money for a car that legally still belonged to someone else, and he wanted to do it not to flip it for profit, not to sell it quietly to some private collector overseas, but simply to keep it, to personally own the machine he had pulled back from the edge of the scrapyard with his own 2 hands. For Matt, this was never just another job. This was the car that had nearly cost him his reputation, his sanity, and at times his friendship with the very man sitting across from him now. It was the car that had become the loudest, most visible symbol of an entire movement built around the idea that ordinary mechanics, working outside official factory walls, could fix what manufacturers insisted was impossible. Alex listened to every word of that offer without interrupting once. He did not raise his voice. He did not try to negotiate a higher number or ask for time to think it over. He simply sat with it for a long moment, looked at the car, looked at his friend, and said no. Then he stood up, thanked Mat quietly, and walked out of the workshop into the warm night air, leaving behind a silence that neither man tried to fill. It did not take long for the world to find out what had happened inside that shop. A short clip, apparently uploaded by accident to a second, less watched channel, was enough to set the entire community on fire within hours. Comment sections exploded with theories. Some viewers were certain Mat had earned the right to keep the car after everything he had personally sacrificed to save it. Others insisted, just as loudly, that Alex was still the legal owner, that a deal is a deal, and that bringing money into a friendship this deep was a betrayal in itself. Fans picked sides the way people always do online, quickly and without much patience for nuance, and within a single day a story about two friends finishing an impossible project had somehow turned into a story about a supposed falling out threatening to end everything they had built together. What none of those commenters knew, what almost nobody outside a small, trusted circle even suspected, was that the offer had been completely real, the refusal had been completely real, and the raw emotion sitting in that workshop had been completely real too. But underneath all of that honesty was something else entirely, something that had been carefully, quietly built for months by a man who has always thought 2 years ahead of everyone else in the room. This was never simply a moment between two friends deciding what to do with a finished car. It was the final, deliberate piece of a much larger legal strategy, one Mat had been assembling piece by piece since the very first day that broken Chiron rolled into his shop on the back of a flatbed truck. To really understand why this single moment matters so much, you have to go back to day one, back to the exact conditions Alex and Mat were working under when this whole story began. When Alex first handed over the wrecked Persport, the legal landscape around independent car repair looked nothing like it does today. The right to repair protections that many owners now take for granted had not yet passed into law. Manufacturers still held enormous, almost unchecked power over independent mechanics, and Bugatti used every ounce of that power against this specific project. They told Alex, in no uncertain terms, that his car was beyond saving. They refused to sell replacement body panels to anyone outside their authorized network, no matter how much money was offered. They reportedly worked through intermediaries to quietly pressure Alex into pulling the car out of Mat's workshop entirely and shipping it back to the factory in Molsheim, dangling the promise of official support if he simply gave up on the independent route. In other words, the company that built this car actively worked to make sure it could never be fixed by anyone but themselves, treating an independent rebuild not as an inconvenience, but as a threat worth actively obstructing. And through every single one of those obstacles, Mat did something that would end up changing the entire trajectory of the story. He documented everything. Every refused parts order was saved. Every locked diagnostic code was recorded. Every unanswered email, every dropped phone call, every quiet suggestion from an intermediary that things would go easier if Alex simply gave up. All of it was captured, timestamped, and filed away. Over 2 years, this turned into something far bigger than a personal record of frustration. It became one of the most detailed, most credible pieces of independent evidence anywhere in the ongoing global fight over the right to repair. Lawyers, journalists, and lawmakers who have seen fragments of this record already understand its weight, because it is not built from opinions or secondhand claims. It is built from receipts, screenshots, timestamps, and hundreds of hours of raw workshop footage showing exactly what happened, when it happened, and who was responsible. But even with all of that evidence stacked up, Mat knew there was still one weak point left, one question that Bugatti's lawyers were guaranteed to raise the moment this case reached any kind of formal hearing. That gap had nothing to do with whether the repair was done well. The footage already proved that beyond argument, panel by panel, system by system, over hundreds of hours of transparent, camera-documented work. The gap was about value. Bugatti's legal team would eventually stand up somewhere important and ask a version of the same question they have used to intimidate independent owners for decades. Yes, the car runs. Yes, it looks finished. But how do we know it is actually worth anything without an official factory stamp of approval? How do we know the owner did not simply throw away a huge amount of resale value the moment he chose an independent garage over the official dealer network? This question has worked for manufacturers for 20 years because it sounds reasonable on the surface, and because almost no one has ever had the hard proof needed to answer it directly, in front of an audience that could not simply dismiss it as marketing spin from an enthusiast with something to sell. Mat understood that answering this question with a spreadsheet or an appraiser's opinion would never be enough. A written valuation can always be picked apart. An expert witness can always be challenged, questioned, or dismissed as biased, especially one hired by the very person trying to make a point. What Mat needed instead was something that could not be argued with in a hearing room, something so simple and so undeniable that no lawyer on earth could talk their way around it. He needed real, filmed, timestamped proof that a Chiron Persport, rebuilt completely outside the factory system without a single official Bugatti body panel, held real value in the eyes of someone with every reason and every opportunity to walk away with a profit instead. The only way to create proof that strong was to create an actual transaction, a genuine offer, a genuine refusal, and a camera present to capture the exact moment an owner chose to keep a supposedly worthless independent rebuild over a guaranteed payday. That is the exhibit Mat needed, and it is exactly the exhibit he and Alex built together that evening in the workshop, not through trickery, but through complete honesty performed at exactly the right moment. Mat and Alex had planned the scene together, but planning it did not make it fake. Read that twice if you have to. The offer was genuine. Mat truly wanted to own this car. Anyone who has ever poured years of skilled, painstaking labor into a single project understands the strange, deep attachment that grows between a craftsman and the thing he has rebuilt with his own hands. The money behind the offer was equally real, sitting ready in an actual account, prepared to move the same night if Alex had simply said yes instead of no. Had he accepted, Alex would have walked away with a serious profit, one that covered his original investment, every dollar lost during the Venom body panel disaster, and a healthy amount on top as a fair reward for 2 years of patience under enormous public pressure. On paper, almost any rational Chiron owner in the world would have taken that deal without a second thought. Alex's refusal carried exactly the same weight of honesty. He had watched this car come back from the dead with his own eyes, day after day, for 2 full years. He had defended Mat publicly against critics who had never once picked up a wrench in their lives. He had absorbed the financial and emotional cost of the Venom disaster without ever demanding a public apology or airing his frustration online. He had trusted the process, even when almost everyone around him insisted he was making a mistake, by staying loyal to an independent rebuild instead of pulling the plug and going back to the factory. He genuinely wanted to keep this car, but he also understood something Mat had explained to him privately weeks earlier, in a much quieter conversation away from any cameras. His refusal that night was never going to be just a personal decision about ownership. It was going to become a legal instrument, a documented piece of evidence destined for lawmakers, regulators, journalists, and eventually the general public. And being the kind of partner he has always been throughout this entire project, Alex agreed to the plan immediately, without hesitation, understanding exactly what was being asked of him and exactly why it mattered. What makes this entire move so impressive is not the size of the offer or the emotion behind the refusal. It is the sheer simplicity of the whole idea. Mat did not need to hire an outside appraiser whose credentials could be questioned under cross-examination. He did not need to commission an expensive market analysis report that Bugatti's legal team could tear apart line by line in front of a room full of skeptical decision-makers. He needed only 2 things, an honest offer and an honest refusal, captured on camera inside an ordinary workshop, in a conversation that looked to outsiders like nothing more than a personal disagreement between 2 friends about who should end up owning a finished car. In reality, that short, quiet exchange was the closing argument of a legal campaign that had been building steadily for 2 full years. The internet, watching from a distance and armed with nothing but a short leaked clip, saw the outline of a potential falling out and reacted exactly the way online communities always react to conflict, by choosing sides quickly and loudly. But when this footage eventually reaches the people who actually decide policy, they will see something completely different. They will see a documented transaction, carried out in good faith, between a private owner and an independent mechanic, with no factory involvement of any kind. And Bugatti, watching from the sidelines, will see something closer to a nightmare they simply cannot talk their way out of, because for the better part of 2 decades, Hypercar manufacturers have built an entire mythology around the idea that only official factory service history protects a car's long-term value. They have told owners for years that a single independent oil change, something as basic and routine as changing engine oil at an unauthorized shop, could wipe six figures off a car's eventual resale price. They have used this fear as one of their most effective tools to keep owners locked inside expensive, exclusive service networks, discouraging anyone from even considering an independent repair, no matter how skilled the mechanic might be. With one simple, honest offer and one simple, honest refusal, captured entirely on camera, Mat Armstrong has now provided something that mythology has never had to survive before: real proof, gathered in front of witnesses, that it simply is not true. Not an academic paper written by someone with no real stake in the outcome. Not a journalist's opinion piece designed to generate clicks and arguments. A real transaction, involving real money, that a real owner chose to walk away from entirely on his own terms, for reasons that had nothing to do with regret and everything to do with genuine attachment to a job done right. In the days that followed that quiet evening in the workshop, Matt and Alex simply went back to work together exactly as they always had, because in reality, nothing had actually changed between them at all. There was no cold silence, no tension hanging in the air, no awkward distance between two men who supposedly had just clashed over money and ownership. The finished Chiron was cleaned, detailed, and prepared for its upcoming public debut. Alex stood beside Matt through every step of that process, helping adjust lighting, joking around during the photo shoot, acting exactly like a man who had never once doubted where things stood between him and his closest collaborator. The two of them, so often painted by online commentary as rivals on the verge of a bitter split, were in fact perfectly aligned the entire time, exactly as they had been from the very first day Alex showed up at that workshop with a wrecked, humiliated Chiron sitting quietly on a trailer behind his truck. What almost nobody watching from home fully understood, at least not until this very moment, is that this car was never simply a personal project shared between two friends chasing an impressive rebuild. From the earliest days, long before most viewers even knew the story existed, the Chiron had quietly become something much larger than either man originally intended. It became a case study, carefully built one documented obstacle at a time. It became a physical, undeniable piece of evidence in a much bigger fight over who gets to decide whether an independent mechanic is allowed to fix an expensive, complicated car without a manufacturer's permission. It became, in the truest sense, a weapon aimed directly at a system that has spent decades protecting its own profits by convincing owners that only the factory can be trusted with cars this valuable. And Matt and Alex both understood, long before anyone else caught on, that the single most powerful piece of evidence in that entire 2-year campaign would not be a broken part, a locked diagnostic tool, or an angry email from an unhelpful dealership. It would be a moment of pure, simple honesty between two people who had every reason to walk away rich and chose instead to walk away aligned. A document can always be challenged in a hearing room. A photograph can always be dismissed as staged, misleading, or taken out of context by a skilled lawyer looking for any angle available. But a real transaction, filmed as it happens, involving real money and a real decision made under real emotional weight, cannot be undone by any press release, any public relations team, or any carefully worded legal statement crafted after the fact to soften the impact. That is exactly why this quiet exchange between two friends inside an ordinary Miami workshop may end up carrying more weight in front of lawmakers than almost anything else gathered over the past 2 years combined. The formal hearing where this evidence will finally be presented is now only a matter of weeks away, and when Mat Armstrong eventually stands in front of that committee, he will not simply speak in broad, general terms about the value of independent repair work. He plans to walk lawmakers through the evidence methodically, piece by piece, in the exact order he has spent 2 years quietly assembling it. Refused parts orders will be shown first, followed by locked VIN numbers that prevented independent diagnostic access, internal manufacturer memos reportedly shared by engineers no longer willing to stay silent about internal practices, footage from an eerily empty official factory, and documentation from an unforgettable public reception the finished car received on the streets of Monaco. Every receipt, every clip, every piece of paper will be laid out carefully in front of the room, building steadily toward a single, unmistakable conclusion that no one in that room will be able to easily dismiss or argue away once all the pieces are placed side by side in front of him. And then, as his very last exhibit, the true closing argument of this entire 2-year campaign, Mat intends to show the room exactly what happened that quiet evening in the workshop, a man offering serious, real money to buy back a car he had personally rebuilt, and the owner of that car, given every opportunity to walk away with a genuine profit, simply saying no. He plans to let that footage play out in complete silence, giving the room time to sit with what they are actually watching before he says another word. Only after that silence has settled fully over the room does he intend to ask a single, simple question, one built entirely around the manufacturer's own long-standing argument against independent repair. If independent rebuilds truly destroy a hypercar's value the way manufacturers have claimed for the better part of 20 years, then why would the actual owner of this particular car turn down a real, guaranteed profit simply to keep it exactly as it stands today? The silence that follows a question like that, inside a room full of decision-makers who have spent years hearing the opposite argument repeated by powerful, well-funded manufacturers, may end up being far more persuasive than any amount of written testimony ever could. It could become the exact moment an old, deeply protected economic argument for tight manufacturer control over repairs finally collapses, publicly and permanently, in front of the very people with the power to change the rules going forward.